Hey there, what I see is people letting their businesses run their lives versus them leading their business to love their life. I see this in corporate jobs, and I see where we step into expectations that other people have of us that do not honor us and allow us to lead our own life. Welcome to this episode, and I'm glad you're here to listen.
From the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. I am super excited to have my good friend LaChelle here. And it's interesting, LaChelle and I met through, well, I think there's some divine intervention that happened with this meeting, because we're both a part of a Facebook group that is like a podcast community of people that have started podcasts or starting them, looking for looking for guests on their podcasts, just getting practice doing it's just like a vast array of things. And LaChelle's caught my admin's eye, and she said, you need to sign up for this. So she kind of gave me the link. I signed up to be a guest on LaChelle's podcast. And the minute we met, because LaChelle has a process where she meets with people, which is perfect to vet people and say, okay, is this a match for my podcast? And I think it was only like a 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep.
Like really quick. And immediately you and I both were like, oh, we need to set up a coffee date virtually. So LaChelle's in Minnesota, I'm in Idaho. And from there, it just took off. And so I'm really excited to have LaChelle here. You are like this bountiful energy. I know sometimes you think you're not, but you are. And, you're an inspirer. And so I really want to have a conversation today on how you followed, the urges of you and I both have a similar faith. So for those of you that kind of get squirreled out by the word God, I don't want you to just replace it with what you have, but that's kind of where we're going to go today. And LaChelle, I want you to introduce yourself and what you do in the world. You're a mom, like you have a lot of different hats.
I totally do, right? Lots of hats for sure. Oh my gosh. So Debbie, thank you so much for having me on your show. Like you said, we are kindred spirits, that we were supposed to meet each other. We're supposed to be in each other's corner. And I'm so grateful that you're in mine. So you guys, yes, it's such an honor to be here. And I wear a lot of hats. So when I'm not a mom of two kiddos and a wife to my husband, I do anesthesia for an amazing healthcare facility here in the Midwest. And then I have a couple of businesses that I run outside of that. Primarily what I like to focus on is really truly helping people get out of their own way and to really be able to step very purposefully with clarity and confidence into the life that God is leading them. And I think that oftentimes we get in our own way without even realizing it. And it's really just helping people not trip themselves up. And I think that that's why we connected so much, Debbie, because we both have this heart for helping people live out their best and fullest life, right?
Absolutely.
And what's so fascinating is that what happened to me was kind of like this transition of allowing myself to step out in faith and to try on a new hat per se, right? That allowed me to discover what my ultimate divine purpose is. And that's what's so fun about this journey, is that I think oftentimes we think that we have to have the whole piece of the puzzle put together before we can take that first step, right? And I truly believe that God does not allow us to see the entire journey, because if that was the case, we would look at that summit and we'd be like, that's too far. That looks like too hard of a journey. Right. I ain't going. Right. And instead, he allows us to take one step in faith at a time. And he allows that to happen where then you take the next step in faith at a time. And before you know it, you look back and you're like, holy crap, like this was the most amazing view. I can't believe I'm, capable of all this stuff. And so that's what's really fun. But it's definitely not the path I thought I was going to be on. That's the point of this.
Well, and I was jotting down a couple notes, because one of the things that I want to talk about too is like, you're talking about this journey, and like I love how you just place that, because it's like, hey, we're taking this journey and we turn around and we look back and like, holy crap, like, look at all of this. And for me, one of the things that I've found, and I know I'm not the best at this either, and I would like to work on this a little bit more, is stopping. And when I look back, looking at the gain, right? And when I say looking at the gain, I look at the gain, but then I'm like, okay, but there's so much more to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
100%.
where there's so much more to be, if I look at being a
Yes.
human being instead of doer, and we don't take the time to celebrate.
Right. Right.
And so that you just made me think about that. But then you also talked about purposefully, like purpose. And I know that's really important to you. So tell me a little bit more about kind of your life and what some of the purposeful things that you have done in your past and are doing right now.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. So I think that I'm going to start out with a story. And for those of you guys who are familiar with scripture, this is going to sound familiar, but those of you guys who aren't, like, just listen to the story, right? So there's a story about this guy who has 3 servants, and he goes away and he asks the 3 servants to take care of his coins. Somebody would say maybe those are talents, while he's away. When he comes back, he finds that the 2 of them had taken their coins or their talents and they reinvested them in order to make the kingdom even bigger than it was before he left. One of them literally was burying his coins because he didn't want to mess up. He didn't want to accidentally lose his master's coins. And so he buried his coins or his talents and didn't utilize them. And when the master came back, he was upset with the person who buried their coins because, like, I gave you these and you didn't do anything with it. And I think that sometimes that happens to me. And I think that sometimes that happens to the people I care about the most, where not only do we not recognize these beautiful God-given talents and coins that we have, but we're so afraid of not doing it perfectly, or failing, or embarrassing ourselves, or just being allowing confusion to really take over, and we don't do the things that we are capable of doing. And so that's really where I just want to live my life, is full out in that way. I want to be able to say, okay, yeah, I've been able to recognize the coins and the talents I've been given, and I've been able to reinvest them to make other people's lives better. That's my whole point. Now, if I were to have played it safe, I would have done everything the exact way that I had planned out. And this is again where I go back to saying, like, we think we have this plan, but sometimes if we allow ourselves to be led by the next step, it's going to take us on a different path, but that path is actually better than the one that we had originally planned for, right? And so this was me. Like, Debbie, I am, self-admitted overachiever my whole life. I'm the nerd who sits in the front row, and the 4.0 student who tries to do everything and then some. And I found myself getting my master's and then my doctorate in anesthesia, working at one of the best healthcare facilities in the entire world. Literally got myself into my dream position, which was teaching for the Doctor of Nurse Anesthesia program in this, top-notch medical facility, literally living out my dream. And I should have been able to been like, okay, done. I'm good. Now coast out to the next 30 years. But I knew that God was putting on my heart that there was something more. There were more coins and talents inside of me that I wasn't utilizing. And so that stirring allowed me to open my mind to what could be placed in front of me next. And I think that's one of the things that's so important, is that when we allow ourselves to be open enough to be redirected, there could be a whole nother path, another journey that we didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, LaChelle, that you say that, because I think back on my own experience, and I talk a lot about brain science. So those of you listening have heard this, where the subconscious messaging, like even there's a culture in the Midwest too, right? That, oh, I've achieved what I wanted, wash my hands of it, and now I'm just going to coast out the next 30 years and work my job to live for the weekends. Now, I'm not judging that. There's nothing wrong with that if a person is happy with that. And I do feel like sometimes what happens is these talents, or these gifts that we're given are very different. And so people compare themselves. I think back to some people that I have talked to that I have the utmost highest respect for, that say, I'm using quotation marks for those of you that are listening, I'm just a stay-at-home mom, right? Because I'm like, take the just out of it, because I don't have those talents, right? Like my son went to daycare and I'm okay with that, but I spent really good quality time with him. But it's like, for people that do that, or homeschool their kids, or people that are in a position that, I guess where I'm going with this too, is I think in the United States, have these like judgments on different jobs and on different, what success means.
Yeah, totally.
And we're so worried about living up to this measure of what is considered success in mainstream that we haven't stepped back long enough to listen. So when you talk about how when you listen and you step in faith, that plan is a lot better than the plan that we put together, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if I'm putting something together without direction from spirit, then I find that I'm racked with confusion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, there's this statement that it is simple, like the things we believe in, the things that we
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
It's simple, but it's not easy
Right. Right.
because it's against mainstream. So I think of all these fish going downstream and one fish trying to swim
Yeah,
the
totally.
opposite way,
Totally.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
just got back from a trip out to the Grand Tetons and Yellowstone. And one of the
So
things
beautiful.
yeah, it was so beautiful. And I didn't even, okay, here's the deal, guys. This is an illustration to make Debbie's point. I did not have any intention of going to Yellowstone at all. I felt like there was going to be plenty of time for us to do that on a separate trip, and that this was going to be all around the Tetons, and that's it. Well, while I was out there, I ran into a friend of mine that I used to work with. Now, her friend from high school actually happens to be a park ranger at Old Faithful in Yellowstone. She invited me to join her and have a private tour from the ranger at Old Faithful that day. So I got to see new angles and have a totally different experience than I would have on my own at Yellowstone anyway, but I had no plans or intention of even going to Yellowstone. I had to be open to being guided to something that's new and unplanned, but it became better than I could imagine. So then she told us about different ways that we can see the Grand Prismatic from a different angle and a better view with less people. Like I wouldn't have gotten that experience. And so I think that we can go into our life with this predetermined agenda, but things can happen for us that allow us to have an even better, bigger experience. And so one of the things that I was ingrained in my programming was that I needed to just climb the corporate ladder. So
Yeah.
my next step was going to be, eventually I was going to shoot forward to be the program director of this doctorate program, right? And I wanted to publish more research, and I wanted to do all the things that the corporate ladder would lead me to, and utilize my education to my fullest, because when I grew up, my mom instilled upon us that you have to have an education because she didn't have one. So that's what you have to do. So now here I am. This is a snapshot of my life, guys, for you to understand like how crazy this was. So I am working full time. I'm doing half of my time in the operating room in anesthesia, half my time teaching. I have all these research projects running. I'm traveling the country speaking around anesthesia seminars. I have my kids, my husband's a basketball coach. The season was starting. I had a lot of stuff on my plate. I was finishing up my doctorate degree at the time. I was introduced to an opportunity that allowed me to start a home-based business. I had no business starting a business. I had no time to start a business. I didn't have any background knowledge of how to do this, but something kept tugging at me. Something kept, continuing to get my attention. Yeah. And so I remember thinking, all right, fine, God, if this is what you want me to do, then you're going to have to send me people I can help, and you're going to have to teach me how to do this. And I literally was able to create another stream of income that allowed me within 6 months, Debbie, to drop my time at the hospital by a day a week.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I want to say this too, because I feel like this is important in the sense that I didn't even know what I didn't know, and I didn't know what I needed until I had already gotten it. And this is what I mean by that. I didn't realize how burnt out I was. I didn't realize that I felt like I was missing out on all the things that my kids were doing because I was constantly in my office. My husband's a teacher. They were home at, all the time in the summer. I was missing out. I didn't realize that because I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was doing all the things that I was supposed to do. And when my life and God allowed me to have this situation where I could cut back, it was like, holy shit. Like all of a sudden, I realized how much I needed that. Like he knew that I needed it more than I did. And so that detour then literally took me on the path that I am now, which is the coaching and the teaching and the speaking. And I actually resigned. Instead of going after that director job, I resigned from my professor position. And that would have never even been on my radar. But I am happier, more fulfilled, and feeling like I'm making a bigger impact than I ever did before, because I was willing to step out into a little bit of faith, to not know the whole stair step, but knew the next step, and to just kind of go with it. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I want to back up, LaChelle, because I love how you said a little faith. Honestly, you had a whole lot of faith. It's not about a little, because when you take that step, I was just talking about this. I was at a mastermind, and this is dropping in October, and this is the middle of summer that we're taping this, but I just got back from St. Petersburg. And it was interesting. I was thinking to myself that, and I was having conversations around the fact that when we take that first step in faith,
Right.
a lot of times it feels like you're at the Grand Canyon, right? Like when you take a step, you're going to fall and hurt,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to fall flat on your face, and the step seems so wide and so far, but then you take the step and you realize it's just a crack in the sidewalk.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And
Yes.
we wait for so long in this space of uncomfortability and pain and confusion.
Yes.
And then we take the step and it's like, whoa. And then what I see people do, and I want to find out if you see this too, and if you experience this.
Yeah.
I did, where then I made myself wrong that I didn't do it sooner.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And then we get into this spiral of like the shadow self and the light, right? Where we go into a downward spiral, which then, I mean, for me, call it a little Star Warsy, but I think I get attacked more when I'm about to do something really great for the kingdom. Like I feel that I've seen it play out everywhere.
Yep.
So we go into this dark spiral because we start to beat ourselves up and say, oh, I should have taken this step sooner. It's just a crack in the sidewalk. And we forget that we had to let go. We had to surrender in faith and step forward. I know I experienced that. And my business coach kept saying, quit making yourself wrong, right? It's not a right or wrong. You stepped in, enjoy that, be happy with it. Remember this feeling so that the next time that you're being like, that God is asking you to level up and go do something different, that you remember what that felt like, so that when you step in, you remember that instead of the fear. But tell me, like, because I know you've experienced some of that too. Like, tell me what your experience is in that, and potentially how you are stepping in faith.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just give you this great example that popped into my head when you were talking. It's like, okay, when I was pre-business, so before I started my business, I was terrified to call any attention to myself. I didn't want to be the subject of anybody's conversation. I didn't want anybody to even notice me. So when it came to my like Facebook game, right? The only people that were friends with me on Facebook are people that like, if I knew your mom, then you could know my business. Like it was a very small group of people that were allowed into my Facebook friends list, right? Because I just didn't want attention, and I didn't want, I don't know. It was just lots of blocks. Only posted the occasional inspirational quote from someone else, and edited pictures of my kids, because I actually was a photographer at the time as well. So I couldn't just post pictures of my kids playing. Like they had to be like my photography pictures of my kids. Like that's how insecure I was, right? Fast forward now to 6 years later, I'm literally teaching like online social media marketing and teaching people how to step out into their authenticity and be vulnerable in front of people, right? I have almost 15,000 downloads on my podcast. I have all of these people. So like, here I am, this tiny little wallflower, all of a sudden putting myself vulnerably out into the middle of all of these things. And so I totally understand. And I remember the first time that I posted about my business, I was terrified. What will people think? Are they going to think that I'm Spamela Pamela? Why would they think that somebody that is, doing all of these professional things, like, why would she start an online business? Like, that's weird. All of the things that were going through my head that were preventing me from like literally stepping out. And I can completely get that, guys. But one of the things that I found is that this is my journey, Debbie. So I found that I wanted to be able to post about my business, because if I'm going to do something, like I want to prove to myself that I can do it. Like that's one of the things, right? So I knew I needed to do it because that's what I was being coached on. But I also knew that I couldn't just be like this giant infomercial for my business. So I needed to dilute it down with other things, like what I'm doing, what my kids are doing, all these things. So all of a sudden I started to be vulnerable on purpose because I needed to dilute out my business message. That's honestly how that started.
Okay.
As I became more comfortable with that, I started to recognize, like, holy crap, I haven't exploded. I still have friends and family that will talk to me. Like people aren't making fun of me. I'm going to be okay. And I started to just build that confidence. Action creates confidence, guys. It's not the other way around. And so I had to get out there and I had to start doing, and then I proved to myself that I could do it. And then it's like this good, better, best. So I did it. And then I started to figure out how I could do it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then I get to a point where, hey, I can teach this stuff because other people probably understand how I felt and I can help them get to that point. And so it's really just recognizing that you don't have to be perfect at once, that all of us start somewhere. All of us have fear. It's really just a matter of those of us that are choosing to take that, even that first small step, that first post, that first, decision.
You make me think about like this came to my mind, and I want to explain a little why, but there's this whole couch potato to 5K,
Yes.
like thing. And that's what I
Uh-huh.
was thinking about, because I don't know about you, but I have found with clients and with myself
Yeah.
that I see a vision and I think I need to get there 0 to 60, right? Like
Right.
I should just be able to go out and run a 5K.
Totally.
Well, that's
Yeah.
crap. That doesn't happen.
No.
And so to your point, and like if you can imagine a circle, that you have this belief and then you have action, it's a circle. It's not linear. So the
Right.
action helps change the belief, is what I'm
Right.
hearing you say, right? Like I never thought I would jump out of an airplane because I have terrible fear of heights.
Right.
But
Right.
then when I took the action and realized, like in this
Right.
situation, I wasn't dying, and
Mhm.
it changed the belief. And then that changed in other areas of my life.
100%.
And that starts that momentum, which is
Yeah.
the upward spiral,
Yes.
and
Yes.
helps you gain the momentum to go do what you want to do. So what I'm hearing you too say is somewhat of that constant repetition, right? Like the repetition continues to build that confidence, continues to help you
Yes.
know that you're stepping in faith. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to run into hurdles, or
Right.
because it
Right.
is simple,
Yeah.
it's just a decision,
Right.
but yet it's not easy to not necessarily
Right.
execute on that decision.
And I think
Yeah.
like one of the things that I have found in myself and the people that I've coached, Debbie, is that it's sometimes not even just that initial like step out in faith. It's the repetition that you're talking about. It's the
Yeah.
consistently showing up. And I think that one of the things that I've seen in myself and the people that I help is that you start to get tired. You start to lose the discipline. You start to get some rejection, or you start to have some people not believing in you, or you start to just get busy and life gets crazy. And so then you stop. And so here's an example. The couch to 5K made me think of this. So I had a coaching client this morning that we talked, and her whole goal was that she wanted to have a goal and a strategy for building her business by the end of our hour. Like, awesome. We literally spent 40 minutes just identifying exactly how she's going to create the habit, how she's going to show up at the same time, in the
Yep.
cues that she's going to use, the things that she needs to be able to tell herself, the affirmations about how she's proud of herself for keeping appointments with herself, all of the things that go into like literally the repetition, the consistency, because it's in the small steps consistently over time that are going to get us to where we want to go. And it's so crazy how much the little tiny things that we don't even acknowledge are keeping us from actually stepping out there. So like one of the things that we talked about is like, I said, what do you think you need to do in this hour? And she's like, well, I need to reach out to 5 people. I'm like, awesome. What does that mean? And like, even just that, she's like, well, you're right. I really don't know. Cause sometimes I don't know if I should talk about the business, or if I should just, ask how they're doing. And those little stupid things trip us up. So then we don't actually get into action because we sit there and overanalyze it. And then our hour of income producing activity is up. So we talked about all the little things that can trip us up, so that when she shows up tomorrow morning at the time she designated, and she has all of the things in place, she's more likely to stay in that consistent space. And I think that oftentimes we think that there's something wrong with us. I must not have what it takes. I must not be set up for this. And then we get down on ourselves, and that downward spiral goes, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, LaChelle, and maybe with this client too, you found this, is sometimes I find that, and at the sake of sounding a little black and white here, that when we don't step in and we don't consistently step in, it's
Right.
not a true desire. Or it's a true desire and we really want it, but we have a loyalty pact with someone, a contract with someone subconsciously, or a double bind where we say we want something and we're strong about it, but yet there's something in us, even to the point of wanting to be like my mother. And so therefore I'm not losing weight. And, it's like, I want to, but I want to be like my mom. And there's this subconscious thought of, oh, I look like my mom did at her age. And that it's really subtle stuff in our brains that hold us back. It's not us doing it to ourselves, but there's messages that come in.
Yes.
And so I look at it too, that if we say we desire something, this is the whole like moving mountains piece, right? We're able to move mountains to make it happen because it's a true desire that's been placed on our heart and we've accepted it. That's a big piece of it. Like being open to receiving it. And then stepping in. And it doesn't mean that we won't get tired. It doesn't mean that there are times that we won't wake up and go, oh, I got to go do the thing. Right.
Totally.
But I found 80-20 rule. It used to be 20% of the time I was excited about stepping into my business. The other 80% I was like, oh gosh, this is scary. I don't know if I'm going to do it. And like all these things. And I found that the more and more solid I am in my relationship with God, the more and more solid I am knowing that I am where I need to be. The sense of urgency I have, it's really more like 90% of the time now I'm up and I'm like, yeah, let's go get it. And 10% I'm like, oh, I got to balance my checkbook, right? Like, or pay bills, right? Like, although I look at it too, because God is always for us. So, it goes to, I'm glad I get to pay taxes because that means I'm making some money, right? Or like we were talking before we got on here, the fact that there are things that happen, I've talked about how my business doubled and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm needing to level up and figure out systems or do certain things. And I think we were talking about that earlier too, right? Like anything, you can look at it as bad, the law of polarity that, oh, something is happening to me, which is the victim. And then we get into that downward spiral, or we say, okay, isn't this interesting? What's the gain here? What am I, if the universe is for me, if God is for me, what is this causing me to do? Well, it's causing me to level up. It's causing me to think a little differently about something. It's causing me to go out and repair a relationship or to go out and make a new relationship, whatever that is. Right. And I use the example of being in an airport because right now, you hear gloom and doom, and knock on wood, I have not had any issues with flying or lost luggage or anything. I had a piece of luggage damage, but you know what, that happens and they replaced it. But looking at it as that it's for me, if there's an issue with something, I look at it and say, I'm really glad they found that issue before we got in the air. Where there's other people, and I'm not saying I'm all good at two shoes, but the observation, and I used to do this, where I'd be so irritated that it was delayed, right? And I'm thinking, whoa, it's so different when you shift that mentality and that vibration. So tell me something as far as when you decided to stop the professorship piece of it, the teaching piece of it, and went into that and then had your side gig. Tell me where you're at now.
So I am in transition again. So I do anesthesia a couple days a week, and I'm helping people in all the kind of ways that you are, which is so much fun. So you guys, like Debbie and I geek out over like brain science stuff, quantum physics stuff, our faith and servant leadership. We both love servant leadership. And so that's where I'm at. I'm stepping into more public speaking. I'm stepping into a whole new program that I'm created for people that is going to literally help with the things that you and I have talked about today. Right. And one of the first pieces that I have in there is just that recognition that we all have this amazing superpower, Debbie, that you touched on. And a lot of us kind of take it for granted, but it's literally called free will. What is free will? Our free will is our ability to choose. So I get to choose my actions and I get to choose my attitude. So I get to choose whether or not I'm going to stay a victim to the circumstance, or I can choose to rise above it. And so once we can step into that superpower, that allows for us to choose better for ourselves from that point on, right? I also am finding that it's so fun and is so fascinating to help people see and mine out their beauty and the talents within them. Because oftentimes I think that we hear the parable of the servant and we're like, yeah, if only I could just look at this coin and say, yep, you're really good at communicating. Okay, I'll use that one,
Right. Right.
And we don't have that, but I love to mine that out of people to help people see the beauty and the unique gifts that they have and how they can apply that to the God-given purpose that they're putting on in their heart. And I think oftentimes too, people just don't have the confidence. They're like, I just don't know what is my path. And honestly, this is the thing. I want to just clear up these expectations again, that we're not meant to know the entire path. We're meant to take the next step, but sometimes it just feels really good to know that at least I'm on the right road. Right. And I think that there are so many clues around us that oftentimes people don't recognize. So that is like lighting me up, is to really to help people to figure out all of the pieces of their puzzle, their unique puzzle that has made them equipped. And I think about my own life in that. I would have never have guessed in a million years that I wouldn't be using my doctorate in anesthesia in the way that I thought I was, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I look back on this, I'm like, holy crap. I started my public speaking in 2008 because I had a professor who asked me to take a 5-minute presentation and turn it into a 1-hour lecture at a conference. That 5-minute presentation turned into my speaking career.
Yeah. Nice.
I think about that. And I think about how, I became a professor and I became really good at putting together and creating courses and teaching. And you know what? Guess what? Guess what I'm doing now? And so there's all of these pieces that I never even realized that I had, but they have been given to me and are allowing me to apply it towards the purpose that I have. And do I have all the answers, girlfriend? There's a reason that we meet regularly, right?
Right.
But do I at least know that I'm on the right road? Absolutely. And so I think that's what gives me the peace of mind, the confidence and the clarity to keep going, because I think that that's going to help me to get to where I want to go faster. That's going to help me to get to where I want to go with greater ease instead of all the damn struggle, the hustle for the sake of hustling, because you think that you have to, all the programming that tells us that that's how it needs to work. Right. And the satisfaction of knowing that I'm stepping into the life that I'm supposed to live. And I can, like, in all confidence say to myself, and I'm going to tear up a little bit, like, well done, good and faithful servant.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, that's where that verse came from, is the parable of the servants. He's talking to the servants who took their talents and they used them and they invested them and they grew them and they made the kingdom better and bigger. And well done, good and faithful servant. And so I'm doing that. I'm living that one terrified step at a time, but I'm doing it because that's what he's asking of us to do. And it's so much stinking fun. And that's just it. Like, we're called into a life of fun and joy. And that's where heaven is on earth. Heaven is peace and joy on earth. And I get to experience that because of the things that I'm doing to help other people and the talents that I'm using, that I'm discovering for myself. And it's so much fun to help other people do that.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that too, because one of the things my business coach helped me with was to see that the law of polarity, where there's fear, there's also excitement. And so, when you are terrified, choose excitement instead, because there's a real fine line between that. And then once you step in and once you practice this, it becomes easier and easier to do. And there's so much more that we could touch on, like the law of comparison and all these things. But we are to the point where we need to wrap up. And so, LaChelle, thank you so very much for just taking the time and sharing what's been on your heart. And I hope that our listeners have taken a few golden nuggets, because there were a lot of them in this episode. So with that, LaChelle, tell us, if someone wants to reach out to you, they want to learn more about what you do. I know you have a podcast called Unstuck.
I do.
Yeah, it's called Unstuck, right?
Yeah, the Unstuck podcast.
Right. There was okay. Thank you. I thought it was. I was trying to remember if there was something at the end.
Yeah.
So go out and listen to that as well. But if they want to reach out to you, how could they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I keep it really, really simple. Even though my name isn't simple, LaChelle Wieme is a different name, but all of my branding is around my name. So you can find me at LaChelleWieme.com. I'm at LaChelle Wieme on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. And so all of those ways are super, super easy. Join me on the Unstuck podcast, you guys. And Debbie, if it's okay with you, I would love to give your audience a little mindset mastery blueprint that I came up with, that are some of my absolute favorite tips that help help people step into where they need to go to get into action, because I've identified, my former professor, like researcher, has noticed that there are 3 things that successful people do, and there are 3 things that hold people back. And so I've created this little blueprint to give you guys some of my best tools to help you get unstuck in life and in business. And I will make sure that Debbie has that link. And it was so amazing to talk to you today. Like, I could talk to you all day long. You know that.
I know we could. And I want folks to know too how to spell your name for those that aren't watching on YouTube. And it's LaChelle, and then Wieme. So take a look at that, and we'll also have the link in the show notes. And with that, it's a wrap. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. If you'd like to find out more about working with me and what that might look like, please go out and take advantage of the 30-minute free clarity call at www.leadyourlituplife.com. And with that, everyone have a fantastic week. Thanks so much, LaChelle.
Bye.